AMD finally did the thing that enthusiasts have been asking for. Well, one of the things. For years now, people have been asking for a dual CCD processor with AMD's 3D V-cache on both of the 8-core CCDs, so a symmetrical 16-core, 32-thread 3D V-cache part. But is it as awesome as those who have been begging for it had hoped? Well, today, we're going to find out. Okay, so a quick bit of history first. Actually, before we get to that, you're probably wondering why I don't have the box for the 9950X 3D2 Dual Edition processor, and yeah, that is the name. But the reason I don't have the real product box is because I've had to assist AMD in the sampling process. Unfortunately, due to limited supply, they couldn't assist a small up-and-coming channel called Gamers Nexus. Some of you may have heard of it. But anyway, they couldn't support this channel, and we're always happy to help the smaller channels. So we express shipped mine across the world last week, so they can get a review up soon. So you're just going to have to pretend that this 5800X 3D box is the new dual CCD model. Anyway, back to it. So 4 years ago now, in April of 2022, AMD blew the minds of countless gamers with the introduction of their first ever 3D V-cache part, the 5800X 3D. And while there were higher core count models on the AM4 socket, such as the Ryzen 9 5900X and 5950X, the 5800X 3D went down as the socket's premier gaming processor, as those higher core count models never received a 3D V-cache version. Then along came the AM5 platform in late 2022, though it would take a further 5 months before the arrival of the first Zen 4 3D V-cache enabled parts, and in a rather bizarre move, AMD decided to lead with their dual CCD models, the 7900X 3D and 7950X 3D. Some claimed this move by AMD was done in an effort to try and force early adopters to purchase the much more expensive 7950X 3D at $700 US, rather than waiting a few months for the 7800X 3D, which would arrive at $450 US. Whether or not that's the case, it was still an odd choice to lead with the dual CCD models while holding back the version gamers actually wanted for a few months. But you know what you don't have to wait a few months for?
Today's video is brought to you by the Gigabyte MO27Q28G, a fantastic OLED gaming monitor that we highly recommend. The MO27Q28G is a 1440p 280Hz tandem W OLED with excellent performance, including up to 1500 nits of peak HDR brightness, deep blacks with per pixel control, and great factory calibration, which all come together to deliver a top-tier HDR gaming experience at a decent, affordable price. And look out for the glossy version, the MO27Q28GR, that's coming soon. Gigabyte also offer the MO32U2, a 32-inch 4K 240Hz QD OLED, which is one of our favourite gaming OLED panels. The MO32U2 is regularly one of the cheapest 4K QD OLEDs. I love the design and, of course, its HDR performance with up to 1000 nits of brightness. You might also consider the upcoming MO32U2 4 refresh, which is even brighter. To learn more about Gigabyte's excellent gaming OLEDs, check the link in the video description.
Okay, so the 7950X 3D and the cut-down 12-core 7900X 3D models were very interesting because it was the first time a dual CCD Ryzen CPU adopted AMD's 3D V-cache technology, and there was a bit of a catch. AMD decided to only feature the 64 megabytes of 3D V-cache on one of the two CCDs. The standard configuration for a 7950X was 32 megabytes of L3 cache per CCD, providing a total L3 cache of 64 megabytes. Had AMD featured 3D V-cache on both CCDs, they would have boosted the total L3 cache capacity to 192 megabytes. But because just a single CCD was armed with the additional cache layer, the total capacity was 128 megabytes. This asymmetrical layout was a challenge for scheduling, which was an issue already faced by AMD's dual CCD Ryzen processors. The 7950X 3D did not avoid this issue, and in our day one review we found disabling the second CCD without the 3D V-cache could dramatically improve gaming performance, boosting frame rates in Horizon Zero Dawn by 8%, 18% in Shadow of the Tomb Raider, and a massive 25% in Rainbow Six Extraction. There was, however, an advantage to this asymmetrical design, as adding the 3D V-cache layer did create some thermal challenges. While it does allow for massive cache sizes, it also creates a thermal barrier. This is because heat generated by the cores had to pass through the cache die before reaching the integrated heat spreader. This necessitated lower voltage and clock speed limits to prevent overheating. As a result, this meant the cores without the additional cache sitting on top of them could clock higher, around 450 to 500 MHz higher. So this meant whereas the cores in the second CCD could clock as high as 5.7 GHz, the cores in the primary 3D Vcache enabled CCD typically capped out at around 5.2 GHz. The idea here was that applications that didn't benefit from the additional L3 cache could run on the cores located within the second higher clocked CCD, while workloads such as gaming which do benefit from the additional cache would run on the primary CCD. And generally speaking, this is how things worked, though not always, and as I noted a moment ago, when scheduling didn't quite work out, we did see a performance regression. After the arrival of the 7800X3D and seeing how well that worked out for gaming, an online debate started questioning if the 7950X3D was a good idea, and if AMD would have been better off going with a symmetrical design that saw both CCDs loaded with the extra L3 cache. As I just noted, there were some technical reasons for why AMD didn't do this, but even so, people kept asking for it. Then 2 years later, we finally got the Zen 5 versions, the 9950X3D and 9900X3D, and it was a repeat of the Zen 4 models, which was disappointing for a few reasons, though at the same time less of an issue because by this point the Windows scheduling for dual CCD Ryzen processors had improved and is now at a point where it mostly gets things right. But whereas the Zen 3 and Zen 4 3D Vcache models used the first generation design, the Zen 5 models, which were the 9950X3D, 9900X3D, and 9800X3D, they were all upgraded with a second generation design. Whereas the first generation stacked the cache above the cores, the second generation stacks it below. And this seemingly small change makes a big difference. With the L3 cache layer now below the cores were able to make direct contact with the IHS, meaning the cache layer no longer acted like a thermal blanket for the cores, resulting in 46% less thermal resistance. This change meant the cores with direct access to the larger L3 cache were no longer clocked up to 500 MHz lower than the cores in the adjacent CCD. Instead, the difference had been reduced to no more than 150 to 200 MHz, with near parity for all core workloads. That being the case, this heavily reignited the debate that instead of just a single 3D Vcache enabled CCD, the 9950X3D should have had two, given the technical reasons are now largely addressed. For whatever reason though, AMD did not do that. Well, that was until now, a year after the initial release. The new Ryzen 9 9950X3D2 Dual Edition processor is the world's first CPU to feature dual AMD 3D Vcache technology for a massive 192 megabytes of total L3 cache, and with that comes a new asking price of $900 US, which I have to say seems very unreasonable. The 9950X3D launched with an MSRP of $700 US, and today can be regularly found just below that at around $660 US, which was a reasonable price when it was up against the $610 US Core Ultra 9 285K. But today you can buy the Core Ultra 7 270K Plus for $350 US, though it is meant to be $300 US. When it comes to productivity performance, the 270K Plus rivals the 9950X3D in most applications, and while the Ryzen CPU is generally much faster for gaming, the 270K Plus is certainly very serviceable. So increasing the flagship MSRP out to $900 US seems like a bold move by AMD. So what are you getting for that almost 30% price increase over the original 9950X3D? Well, a second 3D Vcache enabled CCD, of course, with a small 100 MHz reduction to the max boost clock, while the TDP has increased from 170 to 200 watts. AMD claims this has improved rendering, AI, and simulation performance by up to 7% for certain applications, while productivity is around 3% faster overall. So they're not exactly blow your socks off claims for an almost 30% price hike. And worse still, gaming performance is claimed to go unchanged from the original 9950X 3D, which makes sense given games don't require more than 8 Zen 5 cores armed with 3D V-cache, and even if they did, the latency penalty communicating between the dies does hurt gaming performance. Anyway, before we get too far into making any conclusions about the 9950X 3D 2, we should probably run a few tests of our own, so let's go do that. Just quickly, before jumping into the blue bar graphs, here's a look at how the 9950X 3D 2 behaves under a heavy all-core workload. Here we saw an average core clock frequency of 5.2 GHz, resulting in a peak CPU temperature of 89 degrees, and this is with a 360mm AIO installed. Then under a single core workload, the CPU clocked as high as 5.6 GHz and peaked at a temperature of 58 degrees. Okay, so here are the Cinebench scores, and again, hold on to those socks. The 9950X 3D2 is, drumroll please, 4% faster than the original 9950X 3D, which makes it 8% faster than the plain old 9950X. Worryingly though for AMD, that also meant it was just 3% faster than the 270K Plus, and at current pricing, it's set to cost 157% more. That's the kind of maths that would only make sense to an OpenAI accountant. Then we have the single core score, and here we're looking at a 0.5% gain over the original model, making it 5% slower than the 270K Plus, which is a bad look. The good news though, AMD's claim of up to 7% better rendering performance is valid, seen here in Blender where the 9950X 3D2 was exactly 7% faster than the original version, and 13% faster than the standard 9950X, while also leading the 270K Plus by a reasonable 21% margin. Still not 157%, but 21% is better than the 3% seen in Cinebench. Moving on to the 7-zip file manager compression test, here the new dual CCD model is 4% faster than the original, and just 7% faster than the 270K Plus. So it is the fastest desktop CPU on this workload. Unfortunately though, not nearly by enough to justify the MSRP. The decompression gains are even weaker. Here the 9950X 3D2 is just 2% faster than the original model, though it was much faster than the 270K Plus, leading this benchmark by a 31% margin. The extra L3 cache does boost performance in Photoshop by a few percent, 2% over the 9950X 3D, while it was 26% faster than the 270K Plus, so AMD maintains a commanding lead over Intel in this application. We're also looking at a mere 2% uplift in Premiere Pro, which was enough to see the 9950X 3D2 match the standard 9950X, making it just 3% faster than the 270K Plus. Now for a quick look at shader compilation time, and interestingly the 9950X 3D2 was slightly slower than the original model, taking 4% longer to build shaders, and I haven't had a chance to update this testing with the 270K Plus, but based on what we're seeing here from the 285K, it should be faster than AMD's 16-core models. Okay, so time for the gaming results, and unfortunately I am going to gloss over most of these graphs as the results aren't terribly interesting. In Rainbow Six Siege, for example, the 9950X 3D2 was up to 2% slower than the original model, and 4% slower than the 9800X 3D, though it was 24% faster than the 270K Plus. The Battlefield 6 results also saw the 9950X 3D slightly trailing the original model, though overall performance was much the same. The Arc Raiders results are a little different though. This game does have a little bit more run-to-run variance given it's online only, but even so, the data is based on a 3-run average. The 9950X 3D2 was 4% faster than the original 9950X 3D at both of the tested quality settings, allowing it to closely match the 9800X 3D. Performance in Borderlands 4 was pretty similar to that of the original model. In fact, it was virtually identical for both quality presets, making it up to 13% faster than the 270K Plus, seen when comparing 1% lows with the medium preset. We're seeing the same thing in Marvel Rivals. Here the new dual CCD model delivered the exact same performance seen from the original single CCD version, making both a frame or two faster than the 9800X 3D. Like the 9800X 3D and 9950X 3D, performance in Baldur's Gate 3 from the new dual CCD model is incredible, but also the same, so no improvements here either. It's the same situation in Cyberpunk 2077 Phantom Liberty. The new 9950X 3D2 matched the performance seen previously from the 9950X 3D, though it did make it almost 40% faster than the 270K Plus when using the medium quality settings. As you probably would have guessed by now, performance in Counter-Strike 2 isn't improved either, and this is hardly a game that requires or could use a 16-core Zen 5 processor. Space Marine 2 is a CPU-limited game. It's very CPU-heavy, but it doesn't benefit from the additional cores, so performance goes unchanged from the 9950X 3D and 9800X 3D. The 9950X 3D2 is also only able to match the 9800X 3D and 9950X 3D in Mafia the Old Country, making it up to 6% faster than the 270K Plus. Unexpectedly, we did see a 5% boost in ACC using the medium settings, though the more GPU-limited Epic preset reduced that margin down to 2%. The Spider-Man 2 results are more of the same. Again, the new dual CCD model matched the original, making it up to 35% faster than the 270K Plus. Interestingly, the 9950X 3D2 was up to 7% faster than the 9950X 3D in Horizon Zero Dawn Remastered, seen when using the very high settings, and then 5% faster with the medium settings. It also beat the 270K Plus by an impressive 30% margin in this title. Finally, we have The Last of Us Part 2 Remastered, and as expected, the dual CCD model matched the performance of the original single CCD model, so I guess case closed. Again, AMD were right when they said same performance. The 9950X 3D2 delivered the same gaming performance as the 9950X 3D. Well, it was a frame faster, and let me tell you, that is a bloody expensive frame. Okay, so now something that we haven't touched on yet is power usage, and this is one of the drawbacks, I would say, of the 9950X 3D2. As noted earlier, the TDP has increased from 170 to 200 watts, but in our testing, we saw an additional 60 watts pulled across the EPS 12-volt rails, increasing CPU power draw by 27% for a 4% boost to performance. So, the 9950X 3D2 throws efficiency out the window, consuming almost as much power as a 14900K, so that's not good. Thankfully, power usage when gaming is much more reasonable, using slightly less power than the 9950X 3D for slightly less performance. We're also seeing slightly lower power consumption when compared to the 9950X 3D in Space Marine 2, and again performance was slightly lower in this example. Then in Spider-Man 2, power usage increased over the 9950X 3D by 6%, and here the 9950X 3D2 was 2% faster. Before wrapping up the graphs, here's a look at the samples per minute cost in Blender to give us some kind of idea of what the 9950X 3D2 offers productivity users in terms of value. It's certainly better value for productivity when compared to the 9800X 3D, which is a very expensive but highly specialized gaming processor. Also, as expected, it's considerably worse value than the original 9950X 3D, increasing the samples per minute cost by 27%. The real killer, though, for AMD is the fact that the 9950X 3D2 costs 113% more than the 270K Plus. Meanwhile, the 9950X and 9900X cost 40% more than the 270K Plus, and even if we said the $310 US 7900X could match the performance of the 9900X in this example, it would still be 10% worse value than the 270K Plus. As for gaming, this won't take long. The 9950X 3D2 is the worst value high-end CPU for gaming. Nothing else comes close. The cost per frame when compared to the 270K Plus is 111% greater and 36% greater than that of the 9950X 3D. So obviously for gaming, it's extremely pointless and horrifically poor value. When we first heard the news that AMD was gearing up to release a dual CCD Zen 5 processor with 3D V-cache on both dies, Tim and I discussed it on the Harbour Unboxed podcast, but the discussion really didn't last that long as neither of us could come up with a reason for why such a product should exist, other than, it'd be kind of cool to see. And that really is the 9950X 3D2 in a nutshell. It doesn't really need to exist, but I'm also kind of happy that it does. Like the 9850X 3D, it's an inoffensive product. You don't have to buy it, and it doesn't change the current landscape. The 9950X 3D, that hasn't been replaced, nor has the 9950X or any of the Zen 5 processors. That said, whereas the 9850X 3D MSRP was very reasonable, coming in a mere 4% over the 9800X 3D for about 4% more performance, who really cares about that? And even when we look at the retail pricing, the 9800X 3D at its slightly discounted price sees the new updated version fetching less than a 10% premium. So again, it's not really a big deal. The 9950X 3D, on the other hand, it's just really poor value. And while there is much more to it than simply a factory overclock, all that extra L3 cache didn't exactly amount to much in our testing, and certainly not enough to justify a 30% price premium. Even so, it hasn't replaced the 9950X 3D, and it hasn't increased the price of that part either. So if you wish to ignore the 9950X 3D too, nothing has changed, which is why I find it largely inoffensive to consumers. Rather, I just view it as an additional option that no one should really consider. It's a dumb Halo product that's really only going to appeal to those who like to brag about their hardware or just have money to burn. What I did find humorous about the 9950X 3D too was the fact that AMD announced it right after Intel's 200 plus series arrived, as if it was some kind of counterpunch. And even better was the fact that my 270K plus thumbnail featured the caption, "AMD needs to respond," and boy did the comment section let me know about it. The response though was a bit puzzling to me. The 270K plus was claimed to be a $300 US part. The 9950X 3D2 was never going to be a response to such an affordable productivity processor, given that the 9950X 3D was already selling at or near enough to $700 US, more than twice the price. And as expected, the 9950X 3D2 is more expensive again, a lot more expensive, more than we could possibly have ever imagined. But perhaps we're just not that creative. So I guess it goes without saying, but I'll say it anyway. No, the 9950X 3D2 is not a response to the 270K plus. It is overall more powerful, it's a better CPU, but at 3 times the MSRP, it's not that good. And yes, the 270K plus is currently $50 US over the MSRP, but even so, that makes the new AMD part just over 2.5 times more expensive. The closest thing AMD has to competing directly with the 270K plus right now is the Ryzen 9 7900X, which can be had for $320 US, and although we didn't feature that part in this video, the 9900X was included. For gaming, the 270K plus was on average 14% faster when comparing 1% lows, either using the medium or ultra quality presets, and then in core heavy applications like Blender, the Intel part was 24% faster, 20% faster in 7-zip, and 41% faster in Cinebench. That being the case, the 9950X 3D2 does nothing to change the conversation. If you have money to burn, then I guess, yeah, look, it's a pretty neat CPU, but if you are looking to maximize your investment, it simply won't be of interest. As it stands, the 270K plus is still the best deal for those looking to get the most value out of a system built for productivity. It's just miles better than everything else, even at the current $350 US asking price. But of course, we do want to see Intel get it down to that advertised $300 US MSRP. In Blender, it was about 30% better value than the 9950X and 9900X, while it was 40% better value than the 9950X 3D. You're also saving around $170 US when compared to the 9950X for similar levels of performance, and that $170 US saving effectively gets you or buys you a free Z890 motherboard, and that means the dead platform argument really need not apply to that comparison. Of course, if high-end gaming is your primary focus, then none of these CPUs will really be of interest, as you'll be best served by something like a 7800X 3D, 9800X 3D, or the new 9850X 3D. So as it stands right now, it seems like it's Intel for productivity and AMD for gaming. And really, that is going to do it for this review of the Ryzen 9 9950X 3D2 Dual Edition, or whatever it is. So if you enjoyed the video, give it a like, subscribe for more content. Don't forget to check out that little channel I talked about earlier, Gamers Nexus, because they'll have a video either around the same time as ours or shortly after. So yeah, be sure to check that out. But other than that, I'm your host, Steve. See you again next time.